Welcome back to the Shir in Likutei Sichos as part of the Likutei Sichos project. We will be learning together the first Sicha on Parshas Pinchas. The Pasuk and the Rashi, and then we'll study what the Rebbe says. The incident which precipitated the Pasuk with which we're dealing was a tragic incident that happened when the Bnei Yisrael were poised to enter Eretz Yisrael. So this is at the end of the 40 years of their journey through the desert. This is the second generation, not the one that left Egypt, but their children. And they're all ready to enter Eretz Yisrael. They'd already had their first taste of victory when they fought Sicha, king of Amori, and Og, king of Bashan, and they were victorious, and they conquered land and lots of spoils. Now, as they are about to enter Eretz Yisrael, they confront a new kind of enemy. Bilam, the non-Jewish prophet who had been hired by the king of Moab, Balak, he had been hired to curse the Bnei Yisrael. He attempted to curse them, but he failed because Hashem transformed all of his curses into blessings. But before leaving Balak, who was quite understandably upset with him, he said, I'll give you an eighth, I'll give you some advice. The God of the Jews cannot stand licentiousness, immorality. So I didn't manage to curse them, says Bilam, but you, Balak, can get them to bring a curse upon themselves by enticing them into immorality. And for that purpose, he advised Balak to have the girls of Midian and Moab seduced the Jewish men. Now that plan unfortunately worked. As a result of that, two things happened. Number one, Moshe Rabbeinu told all the judges of Israel, and remember, there were judges over 1,000 and 100 and over 50 and over 10, a lot of judges, 88,000. So Moshe Rabbeinu told each of them to execute two of the people who were sinning with the daughters of Moab. And as a result of the sin with the women, they were also drawn into the sin of Avodah Zarah of Moab, because the women said, if you want us to consent to be with you, first you must consent to serve this Avodah Zarah of ours. So the Eden succumbed not only to the temptation of immorality, but also idolatry. So Moshe Rabbeinu told each of these judges to execute two people who were guilty of these sins. In addition to that, the plague only ended when Pinchas, the son of Elazar, son of Aaron HaKohen, leaped up and he ran through with a spear a prince of the tribe of Shimon who was taking up with a princess of Midian. And when he ran through them, that's when the plague stopped. So now our pasuk follows on that incident, and it says that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu after the plague, Vayihi achar hamagefo, after the plague, Hashem told Moshe to count the Bnei Israel to see who had remained after the plague. And Rashi comments on this pasuk. He quotes the words from the pasuk Vayihi acharei hamagefo, and Rashi adds Vigoimer, etc., which seems to mean the etc. refers to the instruction of Hashem to Moshe to count the people. So it seems to mean that Rashi is telling us that it wasn't just a time stamp. Vayihi achar hamagefo, it happened after the magefo, after the plague. It wasn't just to indicate when the instruction was given, but also to show that the counting was connected with the plague. So Rashi says, number one, this can be compared to a shepherd who had wolves fall upon his flock. They entered into the flock and they killed some of the flock. So now the shepherd counts them in order to know the number of the remaining surviving sheep. That's the first piece. So as said, it seems that Rashi wants to connect as a cause and effect. Because there had been a plague, therefore Hashem said to count it. And for that purpose, he brings the marshal, the example, the analogy of the shepherd and the flock. But, says the Rabbi, it's difficult because we know from several places before in Chumash that Hashem instructed Moshe to count the Eden again and again. Every time there was a change in circumstance, Moshe Rabbeinu was told to count them. So why would there be any difficulty here in understanding why Moshe was told to count them? Rashi has to explain it and yet add a morsel in order to explain it. He was to add the words, lay down minyan hamesorim, to know the number of those who survived. Yes? To say the morsel is already explained several times throughout the Chumash that you not count that every time there's something. We also need to understand what does the morsel add? What would we not understand about the need to count these survivors that the morsel enlightened us? You know why they're counted? Because it's like a shepherd who counts the remaining sheep after the wolves fall upon them. Also, Rashi says it's comparable to a shepherd. The shepherd is the one who wants to know the number of the remaining sheep. Now that doesn't seem to match up accurately to the case at hand where Hashem, the owner of the sheep, told Moshe Rabbeinu to count them. Not that Moshe, in his role as shepherd, his own initiative, wanted to know how many were left. So we could say a squeaky answer that the idea is that Hashem instructed Moshe something which is relevant to Moshe in his role as shepherd, just as it is in the morsel that the owner instructs the shepherd. But why bother with the shepherd at all? Why not just say that the owner of the sheep wants to know how many sheep are left? Furthermore, in Medrash Tanchume and in Medrash Rabbah, indeed, that is the morsel that's brought to illustrate the point. And there it says nothing about a shepherd, but is comparable to sheep, which were attacked by a wolf. So the owner of the sheep wants to know how many are left, and he counts them. Rashi changes from the wording of the Medrash, and he doubtless says that the morsel is comparable to a shepherd. Why? The question is even greater. Not only does Rashi change from the wording of the Medrash, but he changes from his own comment. Earlier, in Chumash Mois Pashas Kisiso, where it talks about the half shekel that every Yid contributed, and that served also as a census to know how many Yid there are, counting the half shekels, they would know how many Yid there are. So Rashi comments there that count came in the wake of the sin of the Egel. There too, thousands of Eden died. And Rashi said over there that the count afterwards is comparable to a flock which is very precious to its owner, and the flock was stricken by a plague. When the plague stopped, so the owner says to the shepherd, count the sheep so we'll know how many are left. So there Rashi talks about the owner and not the shepherd. Why here does Rashi change and say that it's the shepherd who wants to know how many there are? Rashi also changes from his comment earlier about the count after the Egel, in that there Rashi says that there was a dever, a plague struck the sheep. Here Rashi says that a wolf pounced on the sheep. There Rashi says that this teaches us how precious the flock is to their owner, and here it doesn't mention it. And finally, there Rashi says that the dever, the plague, struck the sheep. Part of the Rashi with a second comment and explanation of the pasuk. The second explanation is that this count now was because Moshe Rabbeinu is about to hand back the Yidden whom he was entrusted to take care of. Hashem entrusted them to his care. Just like when they were given to him, they were count. So now when he hands them back, he also hands them back with the count. Now, Rashi places this explanation second as a secondary understanding. Why? Because this doesn't help us in understanding the flow of Vayihi Acharei HaMageva, that it happened after the plague. It's got nothing to do with the plague according to this second understanding. It rather has to do with the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu is about to pass away. So we understand why it's second, but it's difficult to understand, says the Rebbe, why is this second comment needed at all? What's lacking in the first Pirush that needs to be supplemented by a second one? So the Rebbe comes to a new understanding of what Rashi is out to explain. It is not just the flow of the count coming in the wake of the Magefa by Hi Achrei HaMagefa. No, that we know already from before, that Hashem counts them whenever there's some change. That's not the point. The point is this. We learned before, at the end of the previous Parsha Bolok, that two things happened to Bnei Yisrael. One is that when they began to take up with the daughters of Midian and Moav, then Moshe Rabbeinu instructed the judges to execute those who had sinned. So there were 88,000 judges. If each of them executed two, that's a phenomenal number. It's like 170,000. So surely Hashem would tell Moshe Rabbeinu to find out how many are left after that execution. Why does the Pasuk in fact stress that Abayi Achrei HaMagefa, after the plague, Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu to count? Why is it more important to know how many survived the plague than to know how many survived the executions? In order to answer that question, Rashi brings the marshal of the wolf who entered into the herd. And in order to answer this question, Rashi also stresses the role of the shepherd, Moshe Rabbeinu, as opposed to the owner of the sheep. What's the simple difference between whether the owner of the sheep wants them counted or the shepherd wants them counted? Says the Rebbe, when the owner of the sheep wants the sheep counted, it simply means that something happened to his sheep who are very dear to him, and he wants to know how many are left. As Rashi said earlier in Parshas Kisi, so that Hashem said to Moshe, count them, and thereby he shows how dear the flock is to him. That not just, it's not that there's something that the shepherd plays the role. He's counting them for the owner of the sheep. All that's important is to know how many survived. But when the shepherd counts them in order to know how many survived, it's because he is responsible for them. There's something wrong with the way he looked after them, or he feels that there's something wrong, and that's why he's counting to determine his responsibility to the owner. And in order that in the future, he looks after the remaining ones better. So therefore, we understand that this kind of count by the shepherd can only be required when something happened to the shepherds watching the sheep, and he's feeling some guilty somehow for his lack of supervision. But if something happened completely beyond the shepherd's control, then he wouldn't feel that in his role as shepherd, he has to improve his supervision in the future. And therefore he counts to see how many he has left that he needs to take care of. And that's why in Parshas Kisisa, where we're talking about Hashem instructing the Moshe Rabbeinu to count the Yidden to know how many are left after the Egel, Rashi brings the example of an owner of the sheep who want them counted after a plague struck them. This had nothing to do with the shepherd. It's not because of the shepherd that the plague struck. He couldn't prevent the plague from striking no matter what he did. So he doesn't play a role here in the need for the count. However, over here, Rashi says it's the shepherd who wants them counted, meaning Moshe Rabbeinu felt somehow responsible for the fact that there had been a plague. He didn't feel responsible for the fact that there were those who had sinned and were executed by the Beis Din. That was according to the law. But the plague, there he felt somewhat responsible. Why? So before, at the end of the previous Parsha Bolok, it says that Moshe Rabbeinu temporarily forgot the halacha of what was to be done to someone who takes up with a goyish woman at the time when he's sitting with her. So the law is kanoin pegim boy, that the zealots attack him. But for some reason, Moshe Rabbeinu forgot that halacha. Pinchas was the one who reminded him of the halacha, and he actually carried it out. He struck the leader of the tribe of Shimon, who was taking up with the Midianite princess. So there, Moshe Rabbeinu felt a feeling of responsibility that somehow the plague was related to his omission, not implementing right away the halacha of kanoin pointing by that the zealous strike those who take up with the goyish women. So because he felt responsible, what did he feel responsible for? Those who died in the plague, not those who were executed. So that's why in explaining what the Pasuk says, Vahi Achrei HaMageifa, specifically after the plague, Moshe Rabbeinu wanted them counted to know, like the shepherd wants to know, when a wolf falls upon the sheep. When a wolf falls upon the sheep, the shepherd feels responsible because he should have driven off the wolf. He should have gotten sticks and attacked the wolf who wanted to attack the sheep. If he failed to do so properly, then the shepherd can feel responsible. That's what this case is comparable to. But there's something wrong with this pirush, because what the setting of the whole story, Yidden are about to enter Eretz Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu had already been told that he would not enter the land, and he must hand over the leadership of to Yeshua. So he's not going to shepherd them in the future. When the shepherd counts the sheep in order to make sure, and in order to explain that difficulty, Rashi brings the second pirush, according to which it's not that he's counting them in order to improve his shepherding role for the future. No, because he got them by number, he gives them back by number. But as said before, this second pirush is much more difficult in Pshutish Shal Mikra in understanding the simple sense of the pasuk. It's more difficult than the first one, because according to the first one, we know why the pasuk connects to the plague. But according to this second commentary, that it has to do with Moshe Rabbeinu handing back the flock to the owner by number, then why was Torah connected to the plague at all? Therefore, Rashi prefers the first pshat, and he puts it first, according to which it's understood that the plague is the catalyst for the counting, is the cause of the counting. But said the Rebbe, why in fact does the owner of the sheep, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not want an accounting of the sheep after they fell at the sin of the Moabite women and the Avodah Zarah? Surely Hashem would want not just for the shepherd, but for as the owner of the sheep, he would want an accounting. So the idea is that there's something about the sin of taking up with women, goyish women. There's something wrong with it, harmful about it, which is not present in any other sin, as the Rambam explains. In no other sin do we have the idea only there do we have a case of a person ending his connection with the nation, with Klal Yisrael. So there's something particularly heinous about this sin. Generally, Hashem detests immorality, but of all the different kinds of immorality, this one is particularly heinous because it means that a person is detaching himself from the chain of Klal Yisrael. And therefore, in that case, they lost their chavivus, their preciousness. We learned before in the Rashi and Parshas Kisti, so why does the owner want the sheep counted when some of them go missing in a plague? Because they're precious to him. However, when a Yid detaches himself from Klal Yisrael, he lost that quality of preciousness. And that's why the Torah doesn't mention that Hashem wanted them counted, because they're precious to him and he wants to know how many remain. No, it's Moshe Rabbeinu in his role as a shepherd who wants to know how many remain, as we learned before. From this, the Rebbe derives several instructions in Avodas Hashem. First of all, we see the gravity of this particular sin of taking up, of intermarriage, taking up with the non-Jewish women. We can also understand from this how valuable it is to make every effort to dissuade a Yid from intermarrying with a Goyish woman, and how precious it is that a Yid takes away a fellow Yid from this sin even once. That's the one side of the coin. The other side of the coin, we see how Moshe Rabbeinu is a shepherd, and for him, they are still his flock. And he still wants them counted, even after going through this terrible Avera. He still considers them his flock for whom he's concerned, and he wants them counted. He considers them as his sheep, and he considers them the remainder, the survivors of his sheep. They are part of his herd, and now we understand why Rashi emphasizes that the wolf came to the midst of the herd. For Moshe Rabbeinu, they're still his herd. They haven't changed status. And that's the way we need to conduct ourselves, following Moshe Rabbeinu's example, because we're told to remember the Torah of Moshe is particularly true about a Jewish leader, but it's true generally about every single Jew.